Hi, I want to talk about Booker T. Washington. I've been reading Up from Slavery. And I just want to talk about what I've learned from this book. I started reading this book because I wanted to understand how Black people got their wealth, which I understand is an oversimplistic question because the answer is Black people got their wealth from many different sources, and specifically that is how Black people got their wealth from coming from slavery, coming from having absolutely no income to having wealth. How did that progression occur? So Booker T. Washington was somebody that was born in slavery, and when he was 9 years old, slavery was abolished, and so he became a free man at 9. And through the end of his life, he was advising presidents and accrued much wealth. And he did this by starting a school, the School of Tuskegee Institute, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And this was he believed in education for Black people to be very applied, less book learning, i.e., he didn't value Black people getting education in Latin, for example. He speaks about Latin not being very effective, and he wanted to raise the Black population wealth and how they're seen in society by making Black people worthy of society, for lack of a better word. But that is very much not my words, but summarizing this book. I felt that this was a lot of things in this book was what I would consider racist ideology, but it's not racist for its time. It's just racist for 2020. So before he started his school, he went to school, and this school was headed by General Armstrong, who he absolutely adores and kind of considers him a father figure. General Armstrong, was a Confederate soldier, I believe, that headed a Black platoon. So he was very familiar with Black people and wanted to lift Black people. But yeah, he also General Armstrong also very much believed in Black people being trained to do work in the farms, agriculture, carpentry, like work, and do great work that feeds into the community and benefits the community. So Booker T. Washington really absorbed General Armstrong's ideologies, and he was he says over and over again in this book that he doesn't think Black people should be involved in politics, or at least that's the read I get from it. I hope I'm reading it wrong. He feels that Black people should be working in agriculture and doing like labor and taking pride in their labor and getting wealth from their labor. But he believes that, he said in one of his speeches that Black and white people should be as separate as the hand. That like you're separate as the fingers on the hand. So that like Black people and white people live separately and work separately. And he even talks about Black and white people as the races, like there's some sort of expectation to stick with your race or something. So the reason why I wanted to make this video is that I kind of understand where he's coming from, even though like from 2020, I think it's like super racist. But from his time, he actually explained this earlier in this book. So Booker T. Washington is very much the politician, very much the bringing the races together. And when during his time, the 1800s, there was a lot of, for lack of a better word, rivalry, where Black people were recently free, but they used to be owned, so people still had that mentality about Black people. And one thing I learned, and I feel weird saying this out loud because I'm not a Black person, but he described slaves as wanting to please their masters. And this is uncomfortable for me to talk about, but I can understand that. In our society, capitalist society, the highest level of freedom you can get is to be a CEO, to be your own boss. And many, if not most people, aspire to be getting as close to that as possible. CEOs may argue that they're not their own boss, but nonetheless, that's what the corporate world is about. And people want to get into corporate world because that's where the money is. That's where the freedom is. The more money you have, more choices you have. So we have an entire society that has pretty much agreed that having more money and having more income is a good thing. Good thing to strive for. And in striving for that, we're striving for our own personal freedoms. How this relates to slavery is that when there are people in these 200 years where there was slavery in America, there were people born into slavery and died in slavery. That was their entire lives, and all they knew and all they expected. So people and slaves, slave livelihood and well-being was 100% dependent on what their masters thought of them. If their masters liked them, then they're golden. They're taken care of in whatever capacity. Not taken care of. Maybe not abused. Maybe less abused is a better word. So I could imagine that slaves wanted to please their masters as a way of psychologically adjusting to their reality. And knowing that their highest level of freedom, their highest level of good life was what would come from the acceptance of their masters. So he actually goes on in the beginning. I'm not shitting you. He just very plainly says that a slave would put their life on the line for their masters. If the master was sick, the slave would stay up all night because they were worried about their masters. And to some degree, I can see this being like just humanity. Slaves and masters lived in close proximity. I would imagine living close proximity to another human being, you start to care about them. So I would imagine there was some degree of caring, like genuine caring. Nonetheless, slave and master has always been an abusive relationship in my mind, but maybe I'm wrong about that. But I think it's a very weird power dynamic. But anyway, so he became a man. He grew up a slave. He grew up around people that had always been slaves and expected to always be slaves. No, but they, like the Black people during that time, they actually ended up getting the news from the land a little bit earlier than the white people, because the news from the land, the news was coming from the post office, and Black people would go to the post office to get the news and go back home to their masters. Um, and some Black people would like kind of hang around the post office to like collect more news and overhear new things. He mentions this, he says this in this book. So Black people would often get the news before white people. So when there was talk about slavery being outlawed, the Black people knew before the white people, probably slightly before the white people, but a little bit before. And they were expecting it, so they were seeing it coming. And they were very, very happy about it. Actually, he describes the day that he remembers the day that his group found out that his slave group found out that they were being freed. He said that there was great joy, like absolute ecstasy, and then a kind of a depression hit, because they're like, oh shit, now what do we do with our lives? And the older people, there was a slave, I think he mentions there's a slave in his 70s or something, like an older slave. That dude's like, look, I'm not going to be a free man. I'm going to go, like, just go back to being a slave. He just went back to he walked back to the big house, the master's house, and said, I'm going to still be your slave. So I think a lot of people did that. A lot of older people did that. It's so much harder to like have such a enormous change like that in your life when you're older. So older slaves decided that they would remain a slave. I would say probably some older slaves have decided to remain a slave. Obviously the younger folk were like, fuck this shit. And he was 9, so he always wanted to read. He remembers like sneaking in a book or stealing a book or something and trying to figure out how to read. I don't know how far he got. But yeah, like, so after like he's 9 years old, they're freed from slavery. I don't think he knows who his father is, but he was with his mother, and the mother got called in by her current boyfriend. Boyfriend sent for her, I think is the right way. Yeah, so he grew up with his stepfather, and the stepfather was very much like, dude, you got to get to work. You're 9 years old. You got to have some income. So he worked in the salt mines, and then he was able to, I forget what the circumstance was, but there was a little opening, and his mother was very supportive of him getting educated. And so he went to Hampton Institute. That's where General Armstrong was teaching Black people. So yeah, he took a train to Hampton. It was really, really far away, and he didn't have enough money to make it all the way. I think his brother helped him with some money. And yeah, so his brother also helped him when he was getting his education. And then he, after he got his education, got some income from his education, and he was like pretty stable financially. He sent for his brother to also get educated. And then he sent for his adopted brother to get educated, which really surprised me. Like, dude, this guy's a slave. And somehow, and the mother that was always a slave, ended up adopting a child into their family. I mean, I, I can't imagine that, because like they're not, they must have been so financially strapped, but still had altruism to give. um, so he was trained as a teacher in the Hampton. And in this era, like teachers are the bomb. Like slaves just got free. Um, First thing they wanted to do is read. Like if you knew how to read, you're gonna get employed because people want you around. People want you to teach them how to read. That was like the number one thing that slaves wanted to do. Probably not all slaves, but he described it as most slaves. Um, so yeah, so there was like that kind of this golden age of teachers where they're highly regarded, highly respected. Um, and then there was kind of like an influx of teachers where um, I guess he was concerned about lower quality teachers coming into the mixture, because anybody could be a teacher. Um, I find him really stuck up, to be honest. I find him pretty derogatory to his own race sometimes. But I'm going back and forth. So yeah, he was he valued. Okay, so another thing that was interesting about him is that he didn't just focus on education to lift the Black race, but he also focused on hygiene, for lack of a better word. Like he made it a point that everybody in his school must have a toothbrush. They must brush their teeth every day. They taught him, no, well, somebody, forget where, probably Hampton. They taught, like he describes the first time he had a bed with two sheets that you put yourself in the middle of. He described that as like such a like he did not know what to do with two sheets. It was like he was sleeping on top of both of them and then under both of them. Someone's like, no, dude, you gotta be in the middle. But yeah, like where he grew up as a slave, it was, he would just sleep on a bunch of rags. Actually, he said that it was a bunch of rags that were heaped together, and that was their mattress. And as a slave, you would eat like food scraps. So like someone just hand you a piece of bread as you're working, and that was your meal for the day. There's no structure. There's no like, this is the time to eat. No, it was just, there's bread left over. Here you go. So there's very little food for the slaves. That's what I imagine that's the slaves that worked in the field, maybe less so if you worked in the house. He did say that like people that work in the house were, that the working in the house was considered like being promoted, like you're trusted. And so people wanted to get there. Yeah, so Hampton, they taught him how to brush his teeth, how to sleep on a mattress. Bathing, he mentioned bathing, that was a new thing for him. And so he took these things that he learned to be civilized, and he made sure that his own school also taught those things. So his students were required to bathe, which must have been quite a culture shock for them. given that that was never a requirement or even like a thing that they would think to do, because they're just working all the time as slaves. Yeah, so he gets to I'm at the point where he like makes his famous speech. He he's in his okay, so one thing that I should have said at the beginning, um this book was written for white people. This was written for white people. So he wrote this was ghostwritten. The first book was also ghostwritten. The first book was ghostwritten by Black people. This was ghostwritten by white people. I haven't read the Black people one. I want to. But you can see, like, this is like a very, you know, posh picture. White people would like this. I think the first book was called Me and My Life, and this is called Up from Slavery. And the Up from Slavery was also marketing for white people, because white people like to see that you know, came from nothing and pulled yourself up from bootstraps or whatever that bullshit is. So this was also heavily edited from a white person's perspective. He goes like he very much babies white people in this book. So he will take every opportunity to congratulate white people for being so wonderful. Like I cannot count the number of times he stops when he's talking about and specifically says to white people that they're a wonderful race, kind of thing. And it seems like, just reading it from a person in 2020, it seems like just like really focused on race. But like during this time, everything was focused on race. Everything was separated by race. So race was something that was constantly on people's minds. And there's actually a funny story in here where this is where everything is separate. And so there's a train. There are carts for Black people and there's carts for white people. And like, because Black people and white people intermingle, like there's been, you know, masters raping slaves for a very long time. So there's all these like interracial people that exist, and they are different levels of white and Black. Some Black people are very white and some white people are very Black. Like there's a certain there's a certain mixture, or so there's a certain threshold where you can't really tell if this is a white person or a Black person. So when it's separated by race, when you're in a cart, or there's a what do you call it? This person that checks your ticket and make sure you're sitting in the right spot. If this person sees that a Black person is sitting where the white people should be sitting, they'll be like, fuck no, you can't do that. Go back, right? But there's some Black people that are very, very light. So this guy is in the Black section, and this very light person shows up and sits down. And the person that works there is like, doesn't know what to do. If they approach him and say, "Are you Black?" That if he's Black, then he should do nothing. But if he's white, then he should ask him to go to the white section. But if he's white, it would insult him if someone asked him if he was Black. So you didn't want to insult him. So those people were very like tricky to deal with. I found that hilarious. So you couldn't really ask someone if they were white or black, because in case they were white, you're you're um, you're asking them, you're letting them know that you can't tell if they're black. Fucking racism. So anyway, that was interesting. Yeah, I find this book fascinating. Oh, there's a section in here. There's a YouTube video of this book on audio, but it's not the complete thing. It's actually like half the book, or like half of each chapter kind of thing. And there's a chapter that is completely omitted from that book. So this book has different versions in it. Sorry, there's different versions of this book. And from the audiobook that I listened to on YouTube, that I'll probably link below. Yeah, there's a complete chapter that was missing. And that chapter that was missing was about, I think it was Tuskegee Institute that were experimenting with allowing indigenous people into their school. And the experiment was, can we civilize the perfectly wild Indian people? So yeah, the black people. No. I'm wrong. This was in Hampton. It was General Armstrong that called him back to Hampton to help with this experiment, and so it was General Armstrong, a white man, with like 50 Indian people, indigenous folk, and one black man as their teacher. There might have been other teachers, I don't know, but him definitely. And they did this as an experiment to see if these perfectly wild people could be taught. And they obviously, yes, they could. They could be taught. And he actually became quite friendly with them because he realized that they're just people. So much racism. Yeah. So that part of the experiment really reminded me of My Fair Lady. Like that's the exact plot of My Fair Lady. Like holy fuck, they actually did this. And it also makes me think that the Hampton letting black people in was probably also an experiment in the same way. So that's interesting. So this guy, Booker T. Washington, he's like a politician. He's about getting shit done, pragmatic as fuck. He knows that there's race tensions. So the first thing he will say in his speeches is like, white people are the best, and that will decrease the tensions. That will like, now white people can calm down. So I get that. I get that utility. It's really difficult to read it because it's like, it's I don't know, just so, I don't know, it's difficult to read it. But yeah, like he will congratulate white people for just being human beings. White people. Yeah, so he got a lot of income. To get his school started. White people helped fund his school, and also black people. I think he got some larger donations from rich white folk and many small donations from black people in the community. He has a story of a person that used to be a slave, a woman that was a slave, and she had saved up some eggs. That was her life savings. That was it. She had some eggs, and she donated that to the school, and she donated that to help the race. They were very like purposeful about what they were doing. They were helping the race. And the reason why the reason why white people should help the Black race is um, um, it's about like helping Black people be more productive and give more to the community, and therefore take part in the economy, which will in turn help Black people, white people. So he makes that argument like a lot, that you need us as much as we need you, or something along the line. Well, not as much. So there's this thing that I'm trying to come across, and it's not really coming across. He will so Black people, according to him, should stick with the labors and not threaten the white people in their profession. So I think that was a concern that that Black people are going to steal our jobs. Like now it's like immigrants are going to steal our jobs. Well, I think back in that day when slaves were freed and they're being educated, white people were scared that Black people were going to steal our jobs. So this is something that he says over and over again. We're not here to steal your jobs. We're just here to work the land. And there might have been the difference between what he says publicly and what he does privately, or what he thinks privately. There's some hints in the introduction that was not, the introduction's by this other dude. And he mentions that later in Booker T. Washington's life, he was funding Black people to stand up for their rights, kind of thing, which was very much like against what I'm reading here, because here it's like Black people need to appease the white person, make them feel safe, which is a very slave mentality, that you have to make white people feel safe, because you're not safe until they feel safe.